family here. I'm not sure where they are, but they're around. I have a son here by the name of Ronnie. He graduated from University of Texas a few years ago. And he's here with 3 daughters, and his oldest daughter just graduated from the University of Texas with his wife, Peggy. And also we have 2 daughters from our second daughter, 2 granddaughters, Valerie and Nikki. They're here. And then we have our youngest daughter, Joy, with her husband, Andrew, and they're with their 5 children. So it is indeed a very nice benefit in politics to have delivered 4,000 babies and have large families. It's always been helpful. Thank you very much for coming out. This is very impressive and very pleasing, because it reminds me of what happened about 1 year ago. A little over a year ago, certain individuals came to me and they asked about running in this presidential race. And the truth is, I was very reluctant to do so, with the belief that there wouldn't be a very positive response. I am very pleased to tell you that I was wrong on that analysis. So many of you young people responded in such a positive manner, but some of those older folks who remembered a better time, they remembered too, and they were pleased with the message. They have been individuals who knew about, the Constitution and limited government, a sensible foreign policy, but they just had sort of given up and they had dropped out. So lo and behold, they saw an opportunity to come back in. So many who have dropped out and many who had never been involved have gotten involved. And believe it or not, we have gotten a lot of people involved in our campaign who call themselves Democrats. So we have Republicans involved, and we have independents involved, and we have Democrats involved, and lo and behold, we have a few anarchists involved as well. But it has been a very, very important year. First off, I want to thank Chris Robertson for gathering you together. Chris deserves a loud applause. It was just over a little over a year ago that we had our first debate, but we had a pre-arranged meeting here that Don Zimmerman, who's helped diligently in the meetup group here, he had a meeting planned for us a couple days after the first debate. And we had expected a couple hundred people to come, which would have been a very nice turnout. And lo and behold, when that rally came, we had 700 people. And it looks like there's a lot more than 700 here today. Something going, that the country had moved much further along in the freedom movement than I ever dreamed. I always assumed that it would take another decade of basic education, teaching people why it's a good idea, to get rid of the income tax totally and completely. And I thought it would take a lot longer to teach everybody the fact that we don't need a Federal Reserve system. So the reception was much beyond what I had anticipated, and the year has gone very well. We have gotten together not only tens of thousands, but literally hundreds of thousands of individuals like you have become very interested in what is happening, and you know what's at stake, and you want to see some real changes in this country. There's other things that are interesting. I did not coin the word, nor did the campaign coin the term, the Ron Paul revolution. But it is indeed a revolution. It is indeed not a Ron Paul revolution as much as the continuation of the original intent of our revolution. So we have that revolution to know and understand and follow through and improve upon. But there was also another revolution in not so long ago terms. In Texas history, there was a revolution. You know, when the settlers came to Texas, the Mexican government encouraged Americans to come to Texas. And in 1824, they had a sound constitution and they had a Bill of Rights, and it was very pleasing to the American settlers. But lo and behold, by 1832, something went wrong. Martial law was declared by Santa Anna. He arrested some individuals, mainly including Travis, a long time before the Alamo in 1832, and he was arrested and put into prison over in Anahuac, which is in the heart of our district right now, just right near where we live. And that was when the first battle of the Texas Revolution was fought, right at the doorstep of where we live today in what we call Surfside, Texas, where they fought the Battle of Alaska. That led to a grand revolution and a grand victory for Texas a long time ago, and I'd like to see the continuation not only of the American Revolution, but the Texas Revolution against the dictator. At the time of our original revolution were similar to the complaints that our settlers had in Texas. It was the authoritarian rule of the government and not following the laws. Our founders of this country were very annoyed and upset about the loss of their privacy, invasion of their homes. And then that is why they were determined to have a Fourth Amendment and a First Amendment. Likewise, it was this elimination of these personal liberties by Santa Anna that motivated the revolution against the Mexican government. And here we are once again today with a government that's violating our civil liberties here at home and not using the Constitution to protect us, but to hide behind the Constitution to expand illegally the size of government. That needs reverse. I think in a very positive fashion that in this past year we have ignited once again this spirit of liberty. The liberty that has made America great and the liberty that Texas was founded on. And our job in this campaign, whether we're here in Texas or across the country, is to perpetuate this message, to continue it, and to not let it die. So regardless of what happens here in the near future, in the next election, regardless of what the consequences are, what we must say is this is only the beginning and not the end of this revolution. A lot of problems, and I think this is one of the reasons that we have touched a chord with so many young people, is because the young people realize what you're inheriting. Right now, it is very clear that this country fiscally is not solvent. We are a bankrupt country, and therefore the burden is falling on the next generation, who will have to work awfully hard to pay all the bills. The main way you can tell whether a country is truly insolvent and on the verge of a true bankruptcy is the value of a currency. And the value of our currency today is not going up. That is an indication that regardless of what we do, it's going to end because we no longer can afford the warfare, welfare state. We have to stop it from this runaway, out of control state that we have today. Washington now, we have a bunch of politicians that run our lives. They pretend to run the economy. Usually they run it into the ground. And also a bunch of politicians and a lot of support from the public media that says that it is our function and purpose and our moral responsibility, and constitutionally they claim that it is our responsibility to run the world, and that is not the case. We should mind our own business and run our own affairs. Encourages everybody to go to Washington for what they want. Freedom does the opposite. Freedom puts the responsibility on the individual, on the family, on the community, on local government. But once the government takes control of the economy, control of our lives, and policing the world, all the decision making is made in Washington. So it's not surprising that you have a lot of special interests in Washington, a lot of lobbyists, and the lobbyists are under attack today, and they should be. But one thing that we have to remember is we don't attack the symptom, we have to attack the cause. Lobbying is another word for petitioning. You have a right to petition your government. You should never have campaign finance law reform that restricts your right to petition the government. But people say it's out of control and the lobbyists run the country, and that is true. But there's two ways of answering that and two ways to take care of that. First, if we had the right people in Washington who could resist the temptation of yielding to the pressures of the lobbyists, there would be no conflict, there would be no influence by the lobbyists. Regulating the lobbyists will not solve the problem. Ultimately, this problem can only be solved by eliminating the power that government has to pass out favors. That's where our problem is. So as time goes on, government gets more and more control. We've known about a military-industrial complex for a long time. Eisenhower warned us about that. But now, in the last 25 years, we've developed a medical-industrial complex because government runs medicine. We have corporate medicine. We don't have free market medicine. And what are the answers that you hear from all the other politicians, especially on the other side? They're talking about socializing medicine because government has failed. We don't need that. But we have the bankers. The bankers are very much involved. They love the monetary system because they benefit it. They help create the money out of thin air, and therefore they're very much involved too. So it is very important to recognize that those individuals that you see that benefit so much, who make so much money off the remnant of the free market system, are not the ones that will save the system. They do not come to Washington to lobby me for less government. They come for contracts. It's people like you who come to Washington who lobby for nothing more than freedom and get the government off our backs. When we talk about getting the governments off our backs, we talk about this in many ways. First, in a personal way. Governments aren't designed to regulate our personal behavior. They're not to tell us how we're supposed to run our lives. They're not there to promote moral behavior or ethical behavior. It is very good that we all follow moral and ethical standards, but that is a personal choice and a family value. It's not for the government to decide. Once the government gets involved in dictating those type of values, all they will do is undermine our liberties, and that is where we are today. And we have some in Washington who do not trust the people when they say, well, we can't trust the people. We don't know what the books they'll read and what movies they'll look at and what habits they'll follow. And then another group will say, well, we can't trust the people because they might waste their money. They might spend on things that we don't approve of. So they want to control our personal lives, and another group wants to control our economic lives. Then both seem to want to tell the world how to live. If you look at the Constitution doesn't tell the government, give the right to the government to tell us how to live. It doesn't tell the government how we're supposed to run the economy, and it certainly doesn't give our government the authority to march around the world with force, imposing our will on other countries. The Constitution was written very clearly. It was to promote liberty, and in order to promote liberty, it restrains the government. So that is what the Constitution is all about, telling us what the thou shalt nots for the federal government. And yet, lo and behold, what do? We have a federal government that has done exactly the opposite. The federal government's telling us we can't hardly touch our property without permission from the federal government. The government is supposed to protect honest money, only gold and silver to be legal tender. What do? They become the official counterfeiters. They should be arrested for counterfeiting the money. private contracts, and yet they use the right of eminent domain to take property from the poor and give it to the rich. So today, we face a major crisis because of this, and today we have to do something about it. And this is where I have been encouraged. Even before this last year, where I have been much more encouraged, I had always been encouraged that we're moving in the right directions. Not in Washington, D.C. They haven't gotten the message yet. They don't even know yet that you exist out there. Will we be on the evening news tonight across the nation? No, they're not going to hear from us. But they will hear from us in another way, because we have a little bit of competition known to us, and it's been available to us, and we can communicate. It's called the internet. But this foreign policy is not Ron Paul foreign policy. It's a foreign policy that's been around a long time, because the founders talked about it. They advised against entanglements. They advised against policing the world. And Republicans have followed that generally better than the Democrats. Just think, Korea was a war that Eisenhower was elected to stop, as well as Nixon was supposed to stop the Vietnam War. Even in the year 2000, our platform said we didn't like nation building, we didn't like policing the world, and we made criticism of the Clinton policy. And where are we today? More involved than ever. And it's time that we reconsider that. If we do, and if we do believe in the Constitution, our foreign policy in the Middle East would be very simple. We would just come home. It's not so much that we have a choice. It's a matter of how we're going to come home. The Soviets could have heard the same message when they were in Afghanistan, and I'm sure they had some dissidents saying, we ought to come home from Afghanistan. But no, they didn't. But they had to come home because they finally went broke. Their empire ended for economic reasons. All empires end for economic reasons. We didn't have to fight the Soviets with nuclear war. It ended because it was unsustainable, just as the Roman Empire ended. And this is what we're facing today. Our troops will come home. But are they going to come home in a more graceful, decent manner? And you know, take our licks? Tell them what we tried to do. We made an effort, and we have done a lot of good. But it's time to come home because we're flat out broke. And I'm not talking about coming home just from the Middle East. It's time we came home from Korea and Japan and Europe. Ceases to function internationally, which is always possible. Right now, it's functioning much less efficiently. We should take notice. You know, the Canadian dollar is worth more than the American dollar. We should wake up and say, maybe the cause of this is we're printing too many dollars. It's not that complicated. But the reason why foreign policy is so important is, first, when you have a foreign policy of intervention and you have wars going on, it's always used as an excuse to undermine our liberties at home. But it's also an undermining of our national defense. Our national defense is in worse shape today than in a long, long time. They've just surveyed 3,400 major military personnel, and over 60% say we are much weaker as a nation than we were 5 years ago. It is now known by expert economists, Nobel Prize winning economists, who say this war, we cannot end it as the way it's continuing without spending $3 trillion. There's only been one war that we have fought longer than this war, and that's the Second World War. That Second World War is the only war that has cost more than this war. So time is running out. If we wait to the end, it's going to be chaotic. It'll be like struggling to get on helicopters again. There's a much more graceful way of ending it. And that is by saying that we did our best. We're going to turn the country over to Iraq. It belongs to them. Western power wars have been involved in Iraq since World War I. The country is an artificial country written by and drawn up by the Versailles Treaty. So it is time for us to reconsider, and we certainly ought to do it before we see our dollar collapse. If we do it now, we can save a lot of money, and that would be another point. It's the point that we have to get our budget into balance. We're spending $1 trillion a year overseas, so let's save $2 or $3 or $4 or $500 billion a year. Balance the budget and take care of the people who are truly in need here in this country first. You know, it never made much sense to me to tax the American people as we have been doing for decades, going over and interfering in countries where we were not invited to interfere, blowing up bridges and blowing up their infrastructure, and then our government comes back to us and taxes us again and say, oh, we shouldn't have done that, let's rebuild their country. I would say, let's not blow up their bridges in the first place, then we wouldn't have to rebuild them and we could take care of our bridges here at home. You know, we're spending right now in the process of spending $1 billion on an embassy in Iraq. We're building 14 military bases, and then we tell the Iraqi people, oh, we don't plan to say. It has nothing to do with oil. And they're supposed to believe us. You know, if we tell them the truth that we're done with this, we're coming home, I think there would be no more Americans killed. I think they would just say, well, let's have a de facto peace until you leave, and then we'll sort out our problems. The sooner we do that, the better. But you know what? They tell us if we leave, there'll be chaos. But if we stay, there's going to be chaos and more killing. The people during the 1960s, when I was in the Air Force, we were told, well, you can't leave Vietnam because it'll all turn communist. There'll be a domino theory. And guess what? We left Vietnam. There was some chaos. But all of a sudden, after 20 years of fighting, 20 years of the French and the Americans trying to tell the Vietnamese how to run their country, guess what? They become westernized. They trade with us. We travel there. We invest there. Their president comes here. Proves the point of the founders of this country. Trade with people, be friends with people, and get along with people, even when they're imperfect. If you worry about imperfections, deal with our imperfections. We have a tremendous opportunity to do something about it. The fire has been lit. The message is out. It will not be put out no matter what. Somebody asked me what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do my best to keep the fires burning. But the truth is, the message is out there. Nobody is going to put this message to sleep again. There's no doubt in my mind our freedoms are dwindling. We do not have the freedoms that we once had. We do not have the respect in our courts, the executive branch, or Congress. If our executive branch abuses our civil liberties, they go to Congress and the Congress rubber stamps it. It's a test in court and the courts rubber stamp it. Our message and our philosophy is strong, alive, vibrant, and growing. But we have a long way to go to convert Washington. So this is the beginning. So one thing that has to continue, we have to do our very best in this election, get the maximum number of votes, the maximum number of delegates, but we also have to look for opportunities. And nobody centrally, one individual can't say, well, you do this, you do this, you do this. Everybody has to take upon themselves to find a job. And this is what's so wonderful about these meetup groups. 1,500 meetup groups who are loosely knit together in an organization to promote liberty. Now, if I would have set out 1 year ago and say, oh yeah, I heard about these meetup groups, I'm going to raise some money and I'm going to hire somebody to organize meetup groups, it wouldn't have worked. You know, there's no way. That's not the way it happens. Other campaigns have come to us, other candidates, other members of Congress come up, tell us how you do it. Tell us how you organize the internet. I said, well, why don't you try getting a message worth selling? But we do have, I'm delighted that things have moved along further and faster than I thought, because our liberties are dwindling faster than I wished. And now today, you know, our privacy is essentially gone. We can be spied on continuously by our government. Now the big argument in Washington today is our government has come along and told the telecommunications companies to turn over all your records to the government. So the telecommunications companies say, oh, we're worried we might get sued, when they should be worried. But what does our government do? They come in and they say, well, let's exempt them. Let the telecommunications company do the dirty work for the government. And here our head candidate, our lead candidate now in our side, Senator McCain, supports that position. It's bad enough our government spying on us, but to compel and then exempt private companies from doing it, we are drifting rather quickly away from the protection of our liberties. At the same time, we have eliminated essentially the right of habeas corpus. It's been through the courts now. We do not have adequate protection. We have secret courts. We have secret prisons. We have, as a principle, endorsed torture. They're up there arguing. Do you think waterboarding is torture or not? I say to those who vote for waterboarding should experience it before they can vote for it. What governments have to do to get the people to become complacent is put fear in the hearts of the people. And then once people become fearful, then they resort to saying, well, the government has to take care of me. Anything more annoying to me is, it can't be anything more annoying when I hear commentators on the television say, well, you know, it's all right to talk about liberty. And I hear them every once in a while say, and yeah, and I'm a libertarian, but, and their but is that you can't have freedom if you're not alive, so therefore it's the government's responsibility to keep us all alive, even if they have to take away our liberties. It makes no sense. One firm conclusion I have come to over the years is that it's harmful and unnecessary to ever give up any liberty for the sake of safety and security. I'm convinced if we had a better respect and a better understanding for the Second Amendment, maybe 9/11 might not have ever occurred. In the process, in some of the bills that have been passed in the last couple of years, from the Patriot Act on down, but they also have essentially eliminated the Insurrection Act, which means it's very, very tough, had been very, very tough for a president to declare a national emergency. Now, of course, it's very, very easy. Just for, civil disturbance, the government can declare martial law, which is exactly the kind of thing that the Texians objected to, the American settlers object to. But that now is very, very easy. If I'm ever to be elected president, let me tell you. Forget what I was going to say. Now, I'll tell you what, if that would ever be to happen, I would never use the executive orders to legislate. That is not proper. I would use the executive orders to repeal all the bad executive orders. If a part of a bill is unconstitutional, I won't write signing statements and pick and choose. I will veto the bill. Also, I would never fight an undeclared war. It would be there would never be a declaration of national emergency and military law on the people. And that, to me, is what we have to fear. That could come. Under certain circumstances, the laws have been changed so significantly. We have a lot of remaining freedoms. We've gathered here together. I even got on a stage and got to bring some of these views out, even though I didn't quite get as much time as the others did. But we do have some ability to communicate with the internet. There is a lot of competition out there now that has not been available, but we have to make use of it. We can't be complacent. We have to educate ourselves and understand the issues. We have to show the people that we are the ones who care about the people. They claim if you believe in capitalism that you're cold-hearted. People who believe in socialism are cold-hearted and they don't understand economics, and they undermine the very people they pretend they're trying to help. The truly humanitarian system is the free market system. That is the system that takes care of the maximum number of people. That is what we have enjoyed. We have been blessed to have lived in the country that has been the freest and the most prosperous. Today, the prosperity is dwindling and our freedoms are dwindling. It is because as a nation, as we became more prosperous, materialism became more important than understanding where our material benefits come from. Now, all of a sudden, we're getting poorer and we're racing off to Washington to grab up pieces of a shrinking pie. But now is the opportunity. Now I believe this is the reason the message is being received so well, because we're realizing that something has to be done. And the answers aren't that difficult to figure out. All we have to do is look to our traditions. We got into this mess because we don't obey the Constitution. Why not fix it by obeying the Constitution? Freedom is great because it brings people together. Crowds are diverse. They come together, they look different, and they have different values. They have different ways they want to run their lives. They have different books that they want to read, different movies they want to see, different ways they want to spend their money. All kinds of things that the do-gooders in Washington. One group says, oh yes, but they might spend their time and their lives in a way we don't approve, and we want better moral behavior. Others will say, well, they don't know how to take care of themselves. We'll give them Social Security and make sure they'll be taken care of in their old age. So they go on and they don't trust the people. And now what we're witnessing is a failure of government. I think one of the remarkable events has been in the last couple of years, 2 years ago when we had Katrina. People had become complacent and they figured the government's always there to take care of us. And then all of a sudden, even with government's $50 billion of appropriations, you know, still more than half of New Orleans hasn't been rebuilt. And the other day somebody announced on the radio or on the television, they said, you know, it's interesting. The part of New Orleans has been rebuilt has been the part that has been rebuilt by private property owners. Wow, amazing. So what happens when the government comes in? They send a lot of money. They say well, people don't have enough money to pay their bills, so we'll have them line up and we'll give them each a $2,000 check. And the lines got longer and longer. People came from all across the state and the country and got in line. And then the government discovered a lot of people shouldn't have received that money. They said, well, we'll send them a letter and ask them to return the money. But no, the city, people are realizing that the solution isn't in Washington. Central economic planning doesn't work. It doesn't work when the Federal Reserve is doing it, whether the Congress does it, whether it's in medical care. It's always a failure. That's what the message was about the failure of communism and total socialism. But we have been trapped in this country to accept the notion that we don't have socialism if we have partnership with big business and big government. That is not a solution or an alternative to socialism, because it leads itself to fascism, which can be just as bad as old-fashioned socialism. The one thing that they accuse us so often of is that because we believe in these views, we want to go back to the old days. They say, an interviewer not too long ago on the campaign trail got up and he says, and he was rather indignant about it. He said, you'd go back to a document that's 200 years old? And I said, you know, sometimes the truth lasts longer. You know, we have the Ten Commandments, we have the writ of habeas corpus, and a few of these things are worthwhile, so age doesn't matter. But in many ways, freedom is a new idea. It's a very new idea. I said, in contrast, what you and others who object to what we're doing want to do They want to go back to tyranny. That is ancient. That is what's not worth going back to. Freedom is a solution for us. It's not. It is not a problem whatsoever. We do not have to work, shirk from that. We have to understand how it works. We have to be able to deliver the message and explain that it is not selfishness for ourselves, and it's not non-humanitarian. Matter of fact, what freedom is, it is humanitarian, not only because it respects the individual rights and lives and values of each and every individual, that if you really care about prosperity and the kind of prosperity this country has enjoyed, you have to come down on the side of liberty. But somewhere along the way, we had lost our confidence. 100 years ago or so, we have drifted to the point where we think the government has to be the safety net for everything, not only economically but socially as well. And this dependency on government has gotten us into this situation where some of us just see, how are we going to work our way out? But let me tell you, it's not that difficult. If we continue this process of spending ourselves into oblivion, destroying the currency, we're all going to suffer. Even those who think they're smart enough to avoid it, they're going to suffer, because economic turmoil leads to political turmoil. If we do the right thing and cut back, we have to pay a price, because if we as individuals spend too much and we owe a lot of money, what we do is we cut back on our spending, we work harder, we pay off our debts. Our country has to do that too. But if we have our freedoms and we go back to work and have a sensible foreign policy where it doesn't drain us constantly, we'll be back on our feet in a short period of time. But the most important element is to understand that all our purpose and all our action should be for the protection of individual liberty. Unpatriotic. What does that mean? People who claim that are saying that if you're not blindly loyal to the government, that you're not patriotic. Or if you're not blindly loyal to the party, you're not a participant and you're not patriotic. But the truth is, just think of what the founders of this country, were they loyal to the government, the British government? No, the true patriots were loyal to liberty. It's the people and our values that are important, not how government have corrupted our system and our loyalty to that. They don't deserve loyalty. We deserve it. The Constitution deserves loyalty, but not the government itself. The other complaint that I hear quite frequently is when we take this foreign policy and we say we ought to bring the troops home, that means we don't support the troops. But we stopped on our way here today up at Killeen, and we had a real nice turnout. 300 to 400 people, and they were excited, and a lot of active military people. And there are a few here today. And we get a lot of support from our veterans. Any veterans here today? The most significant number that I can cite to show that there's no reason to be embarrassed by our position and think we do not support the troops. Because the bottom line is this: in the last quarter, a lot of the troops sent money to all the campaigns. And if you add up all the other Republican candidates and all the Democrats and put all their money together, they did not get as much money as our campaign got from the troops. Since 9/11, our freedoms have been under attack. And the one thing that I have complained about, instead of registering and concentrating on the so-called terrorists and understanding our foreign policy and how that causes blowback, what have we done instead? We have decided to register the American people. This is This, of course, is why I strongly objected to and will continue to fight this notion of the real ID, which is a national ID card. But we need more confidence in ourselves. We need a better understanding. We need to continue this momentum. Our meetup groups and all others must be energized enough that this will continue and that they will not forget about us and that they will hear from us at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And there's no reason why we can't continue to build this momentum. I have said, and I get the question frequently, when are you going to drop out? When are you going to drop out? And I say, well, and I have told them, I said, you know, it's our campaign, and as long as our numbers are growing and the funds are coming in for us to be supported, I will stay in the campaign. Once we get this confidence, we realize that if we have liberty, and we still have a lot, and we have some creative energy, but the purpose of liberty is to allow creative energy to come about. Under tyranny, it is squelched and held in check, and once you have that, you have the responsibility. It is a personal responsibility to strive for excellence and to strive to improve ourselves and to strive for virtue. That should be what life is all about. But if we allow our government to assume that role, they can't do it unless they undermine our liberties. And this is what we've done. Until now, this is the reversal. We are going to change this. We are going to continue this. We're not going to listen to the pablum of the other candidates who say some of these same words, but they have no understanding what real change means. So there's reason to be optimistic, and there's reason to be very pleased with what is happening. I am a lot more optimistic. A lot of people have held up signs in the past, and they said that I have helped remove their skepticism and their apathy. Well, I've been the skeptic, and some of you maybe had been apathetic, but there are a lot less now. But my skepticism has been removed because so many of you have encouraged this movement to continue. And let's stick together and let's see the return of freedom to the United States of America.